So now I am going to be going into our next session, which is evolving from the Chief Supply Chain Officer to CEO. That is the route that we're going to be talking about today. A little bit about me. I am going to be your host all day today, so I'll be introducing our speakers, but equally to let you know who I am. I am first and foremost a content creator. I am a supply chain professional that has been in the supply chain industry for a long time. I don't want to go into specifics, but a long time. I am also someone that is connected with a number of different people. I sit on boards of different organizations. I am the owner of a company called Future Insights Network. And this network, this business, is a network of over 130,000 senior supply chain and transportation and logistics and business leaders who've all come together to try to answer the question initially about digital transformation. A lot of hype, a lot of noise, and so we came together to try to resolve this and figure out the best way forward. This eventually turned into a conversation around transformation and transformational change in the supply chain, everything from business models, operating models, integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so forth. So there's a little representation of the types of companies I work with. I'm also the host of the Transform Talks podcast. I'm about to celebrate my 200th episode of this podcast. That is 5 years of interviews. I speak with people on a regular basis. There's some of the people I speak with, whether they are chief procurement officers, chief sustainability officers, academics, business gurus, futurists, and I try to get to the bottom of what is happening in the world of supply chain. What are the key trends? What are the key issues? Well, you can listen to it. It's on Spotify, Transform Talks with Maria Villablanca. All of this has given me a unique perspective of a helicopter view to some degree of what's happening in this industry because of my experience. And I should hasten to add the fact that I'm also an entrepreneur. And so what does that do? It gives me a bit of a unique advantage, I think, because I see supply chain from the lens of business value. I see supply chain and transformation from an entrepreneurial perspective as the CEO of a business to figure out what the next moves are that could drive value in the supply chain. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the past before we go into the future. So how has the supply chain profession evolved if we just take the last 50 years? It has been a very big change. It was a very nascent term in the 1970s. If anything, you could argue that it was all about trucks and logistics and transportations and warehouses. There wasn't a very general concept about supply chain, although I did have the privilege of interviewing one of the initial project managers for supply chain, Professor Dr. Wolfgang Parch, who is a professor at University of Vienna. He was one of the first people that worked on supply chain management as a concept, and we talked about the evolution of that. Now, we go into the 1980s, and why is this important? Because we enter the era of globalization. This is when supply chain goes from your local sort of operation and shop to a more globalized world. This brings with it a great deal of opportunities. We are now able to get cheap labor and cheap products from all across the world. But it also opened us up to risk. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then technology comes in. Then we start to look at the rise of the supply chain leader in the C-suite. But I say that very cautiously because it's not very often that we're seeing supply chain leaders in the C-suite in the 1990s or 2000s or 2010s. So what happens in 2020? We start entering this last decade. Well, a lot of great technology is happening, but then something big happens. I don't know if you all recall a couple of years ago, a little thing called the pandemic happened. And this is where we are with our current landscape, what I like to call the cocktail of crisis. The reason why it's called the cocktail of crisis, I had the opportunity of interviewing a gentleman by the name of Vineet Khanna, who used to be the global supply chain VP for supply chain across Nestle. And he said to me, you know what, Maria? The world is drinking from a very heavy crisis, a heavy cocktail at the moment. And I thought, ooh, that's a good one. I like that. I think it's a cocktail of crisis. Why? I mean, my slide couldn't fit all the cocktail of crisis, to be honest. There are issues with supply. There are issues with demand. There are issues with climate, with the economy. politics, with technology, with, you put everything that you can on here. I mean, we could do a bingo to talk about all the things that are crises that are happening around the world. All you have to do is turn on the news. Last week or 2 weeks ago, there was only one war. Now we're talking about 2 wars. And the impact of that on the supply chain is quite enormous, especially when you add to this, and I can't demonstrate here, but there's something else that's happening at this time, and that is there is regulatory compliance that is coming in. A lot of regulations are changing that are going to determine the way that supply chains operate. There is a shift in consumer behavior. We're seeing the rise of e-commerce. We've been seeing it for a very long time. We're seeing the pace of technological change in a tremendous way. We're seeing behaviors change from a skills availability, technical skills being needed, critical thinking skills being needed. All of those things, try to throw all of them into a blender, along with all these things that I've got here, and you are creating almost a once in a, certainly multiple generation situation, and that is our present. So it's important to understand that the world is in a completely volatile state. Your profession is changing. The profession is not changing at the pace that, say, your parents had change in their lives, or our grandparents had change in their lives. The pace is changing daily, weekly. So what does that mean? Oh, I put a little question mark here because I think one of the big things that I think is perhaps a killer for the supply chain industry is complacency. And that is the belief that supply chain is the same as it should have been a while ago. The belief that the same old metrics, that the same old methodologies, that the same old models apply today. And that complacency is going to rot businesses. Because at the end of the day, supply chains and businesses are only as strong as their supply chains. That is a reality. That's something Amazon taught us. Okay, so we talk about the cocktail of crisis, the world on fire. This is the recent past. Just in the last couple of years, we see that supply chain is getting a seat on the boardroom table. We're seeing that visibility efforts are substantially accelerating. Because guess what? If you don't have accurate information and visibility of your supply chain, you're not going to exist again in the near future. Sustainability and ESG took a bit of a backseat in the last couple of years because we were crisis-driven. So this is essentially the recent past. So what is the supply chain profession of the future going to look like? If this is our past and recent past, what is the next 50 years going to look like? And I categorically tell you right now, I do not have a crystal ball, so please don't hold me to any of these. But this is kind of the predictions that I've managed to gather based on conversations with people. And if you take a look at this, I like the term autonomous micro-supply chains. I like the fact that this is an ecosystem, that business models are evolving and changing. The other thing that I like about this is that sustainability is at the front and center, at the heart of supply chain design. So the other thing that I will say, the supply chain is the key to competitive advantage. And I think that's important to make sure that we come out of this room with an understanding of our role and elevating the conversation of supply chain to the boardroom in determining the success factor of an organization. And I think that's one of the things that I determined in my 200 episodes of Transform Talks, in my 500 episodes of Supply Chain TV, where I have interviewed all kinds of people, in the number of events I speak at, in the number of boards I sit at, in the number of conversations I have on a daily basis, the importance of supply chain visibility, the importance of supply chain as a commercial strategy within an organization, and the importance of using methodologies that are not based on our past. So, this is not going to go away, by the way. Geopolitical tension, extreme weather, all of these things are just going to keep happening. And that is coming from a number of different sources, whether it's the Panama Canal having drought issues, whether it's war in Israel that is escalating to very dangerous levels, whether it is the availability of raw materials that is determined by all of these things. One of the key business drivers that I'm seeing is the reliance on resilience, on understanding risk, and on building agility within organizations. And that is in the role of each and every one of you. It's important to note as well, I'm going to go back to the past briefly. The supply chain leader of the past was someone that had a very good handle of their world. The supply chain leader of the future is someone that has a good handle on the overall world. Yeah, the supply chain leader of the future is also someone that has an understanding of geopolitics, of economics, of, to some degree, psychology in hiring, of training, of developing, etc. One of the key challenges that I think that we're going to be facing is also the skills gap and attracting people into the supply chain industry. And that's why I think it's important that we elevate the conversation of supply chain to a boardroom strategic level conversation. I also think the term supply chain in and of itself is going to become obsolete because it implies a chain that is linear, and we are living in a much more complex world. I think that's just one of the things that are going to be happening moving forward. Oh, in case you didn't know this, here's a bit of a news flash. Normal is not coming back. You'd be surprised. I get a lot of laughs out of this one. During my sessions, a lot of people go, yeah, I know, Maria. No, you don't know. This is really the situation that we're living in today. Normal is not coming back. This is the time to unlearn, reframe, rewind, and completely rethink what you know about supply chain, what you know about business. So, the Chief Supply Chain Officer of the future is someone that is part strategist, that is part futurist, someone that has a very deep understanding of the economy, of the business, of technology, because technology is moving at a fast pace, and I would add plenty of other things into this mix again. By show of hands, and how many of you purposefully went into supply chain when you started your careers? Purposefully, like on purpose, okay. By the same token, how many of you fell into this? The majority. Now, you know what? I actually am very fascinated by that. It's one of the first questions I ask people that I speak with, and the majority of people I speak with have fallen into it. And I think that's brilliant, because I think it helps us bring a mix of knowledge into the supply chain industry that doesn't necessarily form a traditional path, and I'm not saying anything against the traditional path, but I think that level of diversity of experience is going to help us weather the future. And I think it's a very valuable and important thing to do. So now we've got the Chief Supply Chain Officer that is economist, futurist, technologist, manager, leader, rock star, board member. The Chief Supply Chain Officer is all of those things. One of the key things that the Chief Supply Chain Officer needs to now think about is, how do we become CEO? How does the Chief Supply Chain Officer become the CEO of a business? And there aren't many of us, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the road to successful businesses that thrive during uncertainty are those that are led by people that have operated in the center of the storm. And there's nothing better than the Chief Supply Chain Officer or the supply chain leader to be the kind of person that operates in a storm. I mean, if there's one thing that I can say about this role, is that over the last 3 years of this cocktail of crisis, you have kept the world moving. You have literally kept the world moving. When I train people in my team, or when I talk to people, I call it my neighbor test. When I used to say to my neighbors, I'm in supply chain, or what do you do, they'd ask. I think, oh man, I'm gonna have to explain supply chain. And I used to really dislike that. Now I say I work in supply chain, and everybody knows, or at least they think they know what supply chain is, which means it's elevated the conversation of supply chain. They finally come to realize the importance of what you do. And when I train people, I say to them, everything you touch, you feel, you see, supply chain. Supply chain is involved in this. If supply chain went down, the whole world would go down. So the path to the CEO, I think, is the next logical path for the supply chain leader. I think the path to the CEO table is something that will help companies thrive or fail in the next iteration of success within business. But 11%, what does that 11% mean? Anybody? 11%? Only 11% of the Fortune 500 companies have people with a supply chain background. I don't think that's very good. I think that everyone in this room has the opportunity of becoming the CEO of their organization. And I think, frankly, based on all of my conversations, it is going to be one of the biggest things that will help organizations survive. This comes from a conversation I had with Knut Aleke from McKinsey, Radu Palamaru, who are the authors of Source to Sold. I know them very well. And we talked about how you get to become the CEO of an organization. But I think that we have a lot of work to do to get there. So this is a quote by me. And this is all about the volatility that we've had over the last few years. And I think I really do want to belabor that last line, which is I think the businesses of the future are going to live or die by the strength of their supply chains. And over the course of today, we're going to be hearing from people that are at the forefront of making that happen. And that will begin with, I think, our next session, to be honest, which is going to be about the Shippeo story and why we are all gathered here today to discuss how we go from the old world supply chain definitions and operating models to this world's supply chain models and this world's ability to succeed within your organization. Now,